This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
What is up, guys? Super excited today. I've got a return guest, and it's also like 74 degrees outside and sunny. So I just came back from Seattle, and it was 42 and rainy, and spent 8 days up there. So I am super excited to come back to Albuquerque. And Marie, you, before we get into who you are, you moved here 4 years ago. So where are you originally from?
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina, and then I moved to Houston, Texas for college. Go Rice Owls.
Oh wow.
And
that's a little humid.
They're both pretty humid, yeah. And then for about 2.5 years, I full-time RV'd around mostly the Western U.S., so spent a lot of good quality time up in Seattle, actually. Went as far as Alaska, and then It was time to stop doing that. And I was like, I have to live by a mountain. And I'd fallen in love with the desert. And I'd swung through Albuquerque, actually. It was one of the first places I went. And I was like, this is cool, but I'm never going to live here. And I don't know. I think I just only saw a snippet of town. And then when I came back through, I saw more and was like, I really love this place. So yeah, I'm one of those annoying transplants who who came in from elsewhere.
I came here in November, and it had rained like 30 something days straight up there in Seattle.
Oh, no.
And I came in here in November, and it was like 73, 74 and super sunny. And I'm drinking wine over at I forgot the name of it, but it was the winery over on near Old Town.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is life.
Yeah.
Like, this is sun 300 days. It's warm. I feel like I'm defrosting. I've got a bottle of wine. This is like perfect. So I was like, I'm moving here.
Yeah. Good choice. I like it here. I'm glad you do too.
Yeah, it's awesome. So before we get into this, I need to know, were you married or single, if you don't mind, when you did the RVing?
Yeah, I was married, and yeah, actually, so my husband and I are actually going through a divorce right now, it's very amicable, and we have a lot of love for each other. It was not, though, because we were stuck in a thimble.
This is the question I always ask, because my best friend is fixing like he bought one of those Mercedes-Benz.
And, the vans, the Sprinters.
Stuff, and he's shipping it over to Europe, and then they're going to go to all the countries in Europe for 4 months. But I was like, I don't know if I could handle that. Mentally, to me, it would kind of seem like, was it a struggle mentally?
Well, first of all, we lived in larger quarters than that, so that helped. Our first RV was a fifth wheel, and it was actually kind of enormous. And we hauled it with like this massive F-350, there were what do you call it? The double wide wheel wells in the back and like extra long bed. I mean, it was like a monster vehicle. And I actually remembered pulling into like a little doctor's office or dentist office or something in Seattle. And like, it was literally only for compact cars. And I took over like 4 spots. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I hate this truck. And so we then downsized to a 32, I think it was, foot Class A.
That's still big, though.
It was still big. But the nice thing about that is it actually had like a separate room, like a door, because we were both working from the RV. And so when we get on meetings, it was like we're like competing over each other,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, this one has a door. I was like, I'd never been so excited for a door in my life. But yeah. And so that was good. But, ultimately, I found it challenging at the time to do that and really give work my all, because I was also focused on like, where are we going in 2 weeks? Like, where are we going to get propane? What are we going to do when we get there? Are we meeting with anybody? Like there was a lot of sort of travel logistics that went into it. And
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and also like, repairs happen and stuff like that. And so, there was just a lot of logistics. So being able to stop RVing allowed us to gain some stability in things like, our work. And I was able to really start focusing on other things that were important to me. I also write fiction. So that's when I got like really serious about it. And my debut novel's coming out next year. That never would have happened without like me
awesome.
stopping. Yeah, thanks. So, I loved it. I might do it again someday. It's not without some sacrifice.
Yeah, that's what I could imagine. And then the idea would be to take everything. I mean, I could do this. It'd be real simple for me because I don't own a lot of stuff. But the whole idea of taking somebody's home and then putting it into something that's 30 feet.
Yeah.
And then having all that storage space and having to get things in and out and then constantly moving, I mean, and then driving the freeway is what would make me crazy. Other people.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to watch out. We definitely did some like stability upgrades, like sway bars and stuff like that. That really helped because every time a 18-wheeler passes you, like the whole thing is just like woof, woof. Yeah. Probably the weirdest thing we had in our cargo though was like a pretty massive Brother brand inkjet printer.
Oh yeah. Those things could take up.
Yeah.
Was it like a laser jet all in one office?
Yeah, it like took over like an entire like one of our little cargo areas. But like you need, because I mean we were working, like we needed to have a printer, we needed to have a scanner, and we were like, I guess we're taking this thing. So we still have it. It's like battered. I feel like it is like a walking, well, it doesn't walk, but if it did, it'd be like a walking advertisement for like the quality of Brother machines. Cause this thing is like bounced all over the US and like still just like works like a charm.
Yeah. Usually they make a joke about them like, oh, Brother, cause they're always having, but you must've got a good one.
I feel like you could like throw it down a hill and it would still just come to the bottom and print out, benignly whatever you wanted it to print.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I don't know how many swear words I've said to printers.
Oh, yeah.
Over the years. Yeah, tons of them. And then the ink cart, they get you on those stupid ink cartridges.
This is why I like those laser ones. I've only had to replace it like twice ever in years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's you need to hang on to that one for a while.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get into NorthStar Messaging. We talked about this, and I encourage people to go back to the last podcast because the last podcast we got really heavy into content marketing, conversions on your website, just some pretty heavy stuff with that, and then also what NorthStar Messaging does. So can you kind of give a synopsis of what? Because I know you guys Albuquerque based?
Yes, although kind of. I'm here. I'm one of the co-owners, and we have another employee here, but we're all remote. And so we actually have employees, and I think it's like 5 states, maybe. So we're kind of all over, but this is our main official mailing address with the IRS. Basically, is here in Albuquerque. Yeah. And so everything we do is remote. We work with clients around the world. But I'd actually need to go back and listen. I'm curious to know how much things have changed since I talked with you before. But at this point, what we've really zoned in on is brand voice informing then content marketing. So what I mean by that is like clients often will have a really great branding guide, right? Like these are my colors. This is my logo. This is how I use it. This is my type font, all that kind of stuff. But they don't have that for how they verbally communicate. And so we help develop that for them. And then they can pass that along to their writer or their social media person or their ads guy or their whatever, anybody who's on their team. Or if they don't have a writer and they're looking for content marketers to support them, we can then do that. So that's kind of who we work with. They tend to be small businesses, mostly service-based. Actually none in New Mexico, which is kind of funny, but and they tend to be things like medical professionals, coaches, educators. We've even worked with some larger clients. We're applying now our principles to like some nonprofits. We've worked with universities, but it tends to be, sort of the smaller, like 6 to like low 7-figure businesses that they're still scrappy, where like the CEO is still kind of in the doing a lot of the time. And they're looking to make sure that they're not the only person on the team who's able to really capture the voice, the story, and the way the brand wants, or they want the brand to communicate.
Yeah. And I always encourage people when you talk about brand voice, if you want to see it done extremely well, Patagonia is really good with it.
Oh, yeah.
And you know that, I mean, but I mean, you could go to their website and then right off the bat, you're going to see what excellent brand voice is. I mean,
totally agree.
From the videos that they have right off the bat to the way that they talk about their supply chain with their products, or the way they source their cotton, they literally are deliberate in speaking of who they are and what their brand actually means. And then in turn, they have a higher ROI.
Yeah.
So why is it so important? I want to get into first why it's so important to establish brand voice, and then we'll kind of get into the definition of brand voice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think all that stuff you just said about Patagonia is true. And then the flip side of it is, what happens when the brand voice isn't focused on? I think sort of there's two broad categories of things that happen. One is what I was saying, where it's like the CEO is still just like writing every email, writing every Instagram post, like, whatever. They're the bottleneck essentially for content marketing. And they feel like they're going to be stuck in that role forever because they can never really trust another writer to get into their head. Or what happens is they do trust somebody else, but there isn't enough information given or received by anybody else who's creating content. And then the voice is like really scattered. It would be like the messaging equivalent of like you click onto a website and, the logo is like this really like industrial looking logo, but then there's like this really like curly feminine font underneath. And then like the photos are like weird kid cartoons. And you're like, these people are all over the place, and that happens with the way we communicate too. If you're like sitting here using SAT words 1 second and the next, you're like being very like personable, and then the next you're being like, maybe a little rude. And then the next you're being like very kind and open. People are gonna be like, I don't get what they're all about at all. I mean, maybe this is like an over exaggeration, but the other part of it that can happen is like somebody really maybe likes the tone of, a blog post or something, and then they want to work with you. So they get on a sales call and it's like, are you people even working at the same company? Right. Like it doesn't feel like it gels.
No, I've seen that 100%. I know someone who owns multiple car dealerships. Mm-hmm. So when you look at car dealerships, they each have their own brand, but then at the same time, you want to make sure that you, as the owner, have a voice over all of them. Yeah, you have OEMs, you have certain manufacturers, mm-hmm. but still, and I've seen this. Like I mentioned, Patagonia. We can, mention Nike. There's a lot of different, if you want to go in that direction, but all of these brands have something very specific that they do. And that is, and it can almost be like Patagonia, they're almost controversial in a way. Yeah. And, they're very clear about who they are. And I want to make sure I say this right, but you have to be, I feel like you need to be brave in your voice, mm-hmm. To be heard. What are you seeing whenever you're looking at, especially on content, because everything's so polarizing nowadays. What do you see when people are do you have these interviews with CEOs where you're saying, well, what do you stand for? Do you give not-for-profits? What do you, and then from there you build that voice out? How does that look?
Yeah. So we run them through a process where values, which I think is kind of what you're saying essentially, yes, is part of what we talk about very explicitly. We want to know, what are the values that show up? Maybe it's transparency, maybe it's customer service, maybe whatever, and also, how do you live them? If you're not talking about that stuff, then nobody knows, and it all just looks very performative. And the other part of it is, we listen to them talk about a lot of things. What's their mission? What's the vision for the company? Who's their audience? Like, let's drill down, because a lot of times there's different facets of the audience. So we drill into those. Also, sometimes there's a mismatch between who they're currently working with and who they want to be working with. And it may not be because it's a bad fit. It may just be a shift in the company or like a new product or service that's, just kind of hitting a different demographic or something. So we talk about that.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you're saying so many great things right now. I was like, oh, we need to talk about that. Oh, we need to talk.
Yeah.
But no, I've seen that. It's almost like, I use another, you got Patagonia, and then you've got Black Rifle Coffee Company, and they're this big company, and they have big guns, and they're shooting stuff. And, but I mean, both companies have huge ROIs. They're making, a ton of money. They're totally opposite of each other, but they're branding their voice and speaking to their yes. audience, whether it's right or wrong, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's ultra clear. Yeah. It's almost like tribal. You know what I mean? And that's where we're seeing people respond to that,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think getting back to sort of that question of like, how do brands think about brand voice in a time where things are polarized? And I will say customers are wanting to know where businesses stand on things. I cannot remember what the statistic I heard was, but I think it was something like 80% of customers want to know where the businesses stand on certain things, especially things like human rights, not necessarily politics, maybe politics too, but certainly human rights, issues. And they want to see that it's exactly. They want to see too, like, is this just performative, or are you really taking serious action? Are you really taking steps? Are you being a steward of the values that you say you hold dear, And so we have to talk about that stuff. And I ultimately, okay, I mean, I'm just going to be completely transparent. Like, I myself am like just a hippie, like,
right. Yeah, no.
And so I don't like, I'm going to encourage people to just like, speak your truth. We tend to work with companies that tend to be aligned with us, but that will happen for them too, right? Like, yeah, sure, you're going to annoy someone. Absolutely. Like, we put out a BLM statement last year, and yeah, I'm sure it annoyed some people, and we did get some responses to it. And like, does that hurt me to say something that I believe in? No, like, it allows me to work with clients who, even if they're not, perfectly aligned, like, we can agree on some things, and we can also, I mean, because we're a content creation company, like, if we're creating content on behalf of someone else, we need to have enough value alignment that like, we're not like sitting here like going, ooh, I don't know about this. So it's important for us. It may not be as important for somebody who's, owns a spa or something, where you have like a little bit less of a deep conversation with every single client or customer who comes in the door. But, so take this with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, I think, our customers, they tend to feel strongly, and they want to support brands that are aligned with them. And they have a lot of options out there. Mm-hmm. And so I think, just being honest with who you are, what you believe, and how you're contributing, can really go a long way. And ultimately too, like, I've worked in nonprofits a long time, and before I had this business, and that a little bit during. And, I think a lot of what I learned there really can apply to business, that like, you could actually push your philanthropy farther through your business sometimes than you can personally. And so it doesn't have to just be this performative thing. It doesn't have to just be like, oh, icky, like Coca-Cola is saying that they feel this way or that way about whatever bill, but then they donated to her. Like, sure, there's stuff like that. But like, I think for small businesses, I think there's a really huge opportunity. I mean, and large businesses, but like for those of us where we can be very agile, there's a great opportunity for us to kind of put our money where our mouth is and make a difference and allow our clients and customers to be part of that wave with us.
Yeah. And, this is one of the things that I've been complaining a lot about. And I've been talking about this on my tech podcast is the way that Google, Facebook, these big tech companies have put people in buckets.
Yeah.
And then they market to, oh, okay, you're far left, you're far right.
Yeah.
Okay, you're liking these things, and then we're going to reinforce this, and it created all this, all that. But, and I don't want to turn this into a political thing, but, I have a friend of mine who's very left, but he loves hunting. I have another friend of mine who's, conservatively right, but, pretty socially liberal.
Totally.
So, and I know you do and I do, and we have a ton of friends and a ton of people that we know that are all over the spectrum when it comes to, and so you and your voice can be unique if it's authentic.
Yes. Yes.
So if you're a CEO and you love this or you love that, and you're giving to these organizations, maybe it's you're helping dogs or whatever. I mean, we just did that with our company, just donated a bunch to orphanage and then to these because we I don't want to get too heavy into it, but we're a global company, global tech company. So we have decentralized teams set up, in each of these different countries. And so we allow the teams to be able to pick their not-for-profits who they want to donate in their local area. And then we go, and then it's amazing to see the videos and the pictures and everything that we get all over the world from this. But that's our brand voice is what we call the Big Seven, climate stability, education access, human rights, global peace, public health, government, corporate transparency, and economic equalization. And that is like the thing. We do podcasts on it. We talk about it constantly. We bring special guests on, and that is what we talk about. We're a tech company, but our main voice is to help humanity, because we believe we have 50, 70 years left. So if we don't have a home, then we're kind of screwed. So, we're very vocal, and we get a lot of emails. I can't, why are you guys do data. So why are you guys, who do you guys
get in your lane? Yeah.
But it's who we're passionate about, and it builds the culture.
Yeah.
And the people that are drawn to us and it's, because this is something, and this is kind of long, but I want you to talk about this because you talked about this before. We built our audience off of our branding.
Yeah.
We weren't like how politicians of old used to do, like, well, let's poll these areas and then find out what's most successful. And then, I need to act this way around these people No, this is who we are. We're going to put out a bunch of material and brand ourselves this way. And then we began to attract like-minded people.
Yeah.
And then that created loyalty, and people that became on board. And then we call them data champions. They begin to become data champions for us and begin to share and share our posts and all that, and we haven't even had to spend that much in marketing because of it.
Yeah.
So whenever you look at brand voice, and, because hopefully that was a long definition that you and I talked about, but how does it convert into sales? Because a lot of people say, yeah, I can make a video or I can, put myself out there a little bit more. But how does it actually convert? Like, how are you seeing with your clients where it's growing their company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the easiest answer is if the CEO has been the bottleneck, like they're probably more valuable doing something else that's going to move the company forward. So just actually reclaiming the CEO's time for leadership as opposed to content marketing, that's huge. But when you want to actually talk about like brand voice itself, the mechanism of it, and, how it can actually create an ROI for business, there's a lot of answers here too. One of them is actually giving you a clarity and direction for content strategy. So just saying something like, I want to be out there more is just kind of like an invitation to throw spaghetti at the wall, right? Whereas if you have the direction of your brand voice guide, you're going to know exactly what your content pillars are, exactly how those content pillars then lead to sales. And so then you can really, this is an oversimplification, absolutely. But like, it's almost like, do I want to turn on this spigot right now? and then do I want to turn it off? Do I want to turn on that spigot? Because even if you're not selling with every, social post, which like I don't encourage people to sell with everything they put out there.
Right.
But you're prepping people, for an eventual sale by like educating them on things, offering them cool new ways to think about something they've never thought about that way, sharing a personal story or maybe like a client success story. There's a lot of content that can be created that then when it is time to ask for the sale, people who've been familiar with the content are ready. All the objections have already been answered. The questions they've had have already been answered. They believe in the value. They're ready to go.
Yeah, because it aligns with their values.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think just it opens the door to create a true cohesive strategy that then directly ties into offers essentially.
No, that makes sense. And so because I want people to know this before we'll stop in the middle of the podcast here and plug your website, but it's NorthStarMessaging.com. And you have a brand voice guide on there, it looks like?
Yeah. So, we have a service where we go through it with our clients. But we also have, I want to say it's like $17 in our funnel. So you can get that and that'll help with just things like language. It's not as detailed as going through it with us, but the other thing is, if folks listening to this have a writer on their team, or if someone is the freelance writer listening to this, we are going to be training other writers on our process starting later this year in 2021. So that's something that folks can stay tuned to if they want to basically grab, the how-to guide and implement it within their own company.
So whenever you're looking at content creation in the sense of with brand voice. So you have sat down with the client, you've outlined their brand voice, you've highlighted their values, and then you've put together this whole package basically for them. Now it's time to create content.
Yeah.
So, and that is content around that. Now, how does that process begin? Is it having the CEO get his team together and say, this is where, because you're talking small business, that's most of my listeners. So I want people to understand that whether there's 4 employees or whether there's, 400, what is that process that starts in the beginning after you've identified the brand voice?
Yeah. So we then bring in anybody who's going to be creating content on behalf of the business. So, this could just be maybe a VA who's also able to write social posts, or maybe it is like the whole marketing team, right? It kind of just depends on the scope of the business. And we train them on the process of how to use it. But essentially what we encourage them to do is use this almost as like a checklist, right? Like you can go down the list here. Here are specific words to avoid. And here's why, because it doesn't align with the values of the brand. And here's an alternative to use instead, right? And so like as you're editing, you can go down and be like, whoop, there's that word. I don't want to use that. Okay, great. Also, you can take a look at, we also include some core like brand stories in there. So is there a way to pull in the brand story? And not just like the same story over and over again. There's like about half a dozen of them that can be used in different ways. We also pull out messaging wins. Like here's like one sentence that we extracted that was really powerful. Is there a way to plug this in? Does it connect? Because whenever this one sentence or statement is issued, people's heads turn. This is like one of those like really successful little sound bites, essentially.
Right.
And it's also like, okay, is this aligned with our values? We don't do DEI work in terms of, diversity, equity, and inclusivity in terms of language specifically. We actually encourage our clients to work with a DEI consultant directly. But a lot of times those topics do come up when we talk about values. So it's important to say like, hey, is there anything here that is out of alignment with our values, right? It could even be something as simple as like, one of our values is customer service, but like we're kind of asking them to take like 7 steps. That's too complicated. Like we need to make this simple for them, So, that kind of stuff. And then like, does it tie in with an offer eventually, even if we're not selling right now? Does this tie into a content pillar that then ties into an offer, so that we are continually prepping people? And if they only see 5 things from us, like, that's great. And they're like already really get a good sense of like who we are, what we do, why it matters.
Yeah, and I mean, those are all like whenever you look at marketing. Those I was in a marketing meeting the other day consulting with this company, and it was so funny because I happened to walk in the meeting, and they had their the agency there, and then they had a couple people from different advertising avenues, billboards, newspapers, all that stuff, TV, and then they were all just sitting around like, well, what should we do next month?
Yeah.
And I was sitting there thinking like, what should you do next month?
Yeah.
Here's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you guys are just gonna like wing it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other big question instead is like, what are your business goals, right? Like, no matter how vague. But I think that's a great place to start with this, when you're like, how do I turn this like weird guide thing into an actual strategy? Like, okay, well, what do you want? Like, do you want to make $500,000 on this new product? Do you want to like, whatever, do you want to just like gain 10,000 new people to the email list? Do you want like whatever the goal is? That's totally valid. That's great. I would encourage you to know why, but whatever the goal is, then the question is like, okay, well, how then can content support us in getting there?
Yeah, and I don't think people go that far.
Yeah.
To sit there. I mean, that's an excellent tip there, to look at it and say, what does the team agree on that we should, because getting 10,000 people's email addresses and having them, if your unsubscribe rate is really low and they're opening your emails, that may be an avenue to go for a while. I mean, that could be very lucrative.
And again, like, to know why, right? Well, it's because we're going to launch this cool new e-course in September. So I want to make sure that we actually have someone to launch it to. Like, it's not just because, I don't know, I want to feel popular. Like,
right. Yeah. And it's so funny because, whenever you hear the messaging, I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and a commercial came on, and basically the whole message was about how they've been, here since 1901, and then it was just so generic.
Yeah.
And it was all like narcissistic, all about them.
Yes.
How amazing the company is, and nothing about the customer.
Yeah.
Or who you are. There was none of that, and it was just like, those type of things, you're just wasting your money. People are tuning that out so quickly.
Yeah. Probably a lot of folks reading or listening to this have read this book or familiar with it, but I definitely recommend just like glancing at least the Story Brand Framework by Donald Miller. Yes. It's for like website copy, but like the idea behind it is like, you're Obi-Wan, they're Luke, like they're the hero.
Right.
You're just the guide.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we adopted that as our marketing philosophy with at our company, and we kind of made it as the Sherpa.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're the expert that's has humility. We never put the spotlight on them. They're the one that's climbing Mount Everest, and they're going to get their picture taken, and we just take them there safely. So whenever I want to kind of get into this, because I don't think a lot of business leaders understand the importance of having a writer. So and I see that more and more with companies who, not just for their website, but, having a writer that is displaying this brand in every email that goes out, in every piece of content that's on, Instagram or Facebook. What are you seeing? And are you seeing more companies buy writers, or are they using companies like you, and then you guys are, figuring it out for them? How is that working with writers?
Yeah. Writers, like all creatives, I think, run into some issues. I'm going to like get to the answer, I promise, but I'm going to get there in a backwards way.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because this is like, I'm going to try not to get on my little soapbox about this.
No, please do. I'd love it.
Well, I mean, I might take up the rest of your day, but so that's really, I'm just trying to spare you. But yeah, so I mean, okay, everybody has like, probably written an essay in like 8th grade English class or whatever, right? And so then it becomes this thing which, like, because it's accessible to learn how to write in some form or fashion, it then has a tendency to become devalued. And so you're right. Like, a lot of folks don't really realize what a writer can do for them. Because yeah, I mean, they're also in the, hey, I wrote an 8th grade paper camp and got an A on it. Woohoo. Right. And so, like, and that's great. And also the kind of writing that a business writer, a content marketer can create for you is a whole nother beast. You know, I mean, these are folks who understand SEO and like what to do with it, because that's the kicker, right?
Right.
These are folks who really pay attention to trends. These are folks who can help you see past your own maybe sort of pet inclination to veer into the clever and instead pull you back to the clear. Right. Because we don't want to confuse people with something that, like, oh, I'm really proud of this alliteration, but it like doesn't actually like say what it is, you know? These are folks who also, like, yeah, they know best copywriting practices. They are often content strategists. And so if you're not asking yourself the question, like, what are my business goals and how can content help me achieve them? They will be asking you those questions. They can also generate ideas for you. So there's so much more than just someone who sits at the computer and types words together. There's someone who is really thinking about how to move the business forward. They're often visionaries who also are
Right.
really detail oriented. They're very much like on your side and want you to succeed. And they also are applying their precious creative energy to the success of your brand. They really want you to succeed. You know, they want to be a team member. And so I personally think, you know, it ought to be near the top of hires for CEOs when they're in the position to do so, especially if they find that they themselves are the bottleneck or that the content they're creating just isn't really connecting. You know, then yeah, I mean, a writer can really make a difference. They're not, you know, wizards or magic workers. Like, if a writer ever promises you a specific ROI, like, probably run the other way. You know, because they may go about getting that result for you in an unethical way or a way that just doesn't suit your brand and its values. But yeah, I think, you know, a content marketer who has been in the game for a while, they're very serious about what they do. Yeah, I mean, it's way more than a writer.
Yeah. And one of the things I've seen, and you can probably testify to this, is the people will hire a writer, you know, someone that's creating content. They have all these articles. And then the CEO wants to proofread every single article, make tons of revisions, and then basically is frustrated because they pretty much had to rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then by the time you look at the article, it's so diced up and, you know, not even functional.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so like if you were going to talk to someone, a CMO, a CEO, somebody that is really hands-on that way, how do they develop trust with someone that's creating content?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I can't answer for other writers, but what we've discovered works for us is we start with this brand voice process, because if we're able to say, like, we're reflecting back to you exactly this, like, this is a snapshot of the brand communication style at this point and where you want to head towards. When we nail that, it already has a high degree of confidence created within our ability to then implement that. Then we also are very upfront, even in like sales calls. We are very upfront about the fact that, you know, this is the makeup of your writing team. Like, this is who's on it. This is how many rounds of revisions we offer. You know, and we used to make it unlimited. Not anymore. It's one thing that a friend of mine, who her name is Brandy Lawson, she runs Fiery FX, which is a really great marketing agency out of Phoenix. One thing that she said to me in her brand voice intensive was, I'm never going to ask a client, do you like it? And I was like, oh, tell me more. And she was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, I mean, yes, I want it to be aligned with their values and like I want it to feel aligned with their brand. But ultimately, I'm looking at the data and
Right.
I'm the marketer. I know this stuff. You know your industry. I know marketing. So trust me that it's not about what you like. It's about what works. And I promise I'm here on your team. I'm going to advocate for you getting what works for you, what helps your business the most. And I think it's the same with a writer who's willing to push back. You know, some may not be. They may still kind of be learning those soft skills.
Right.
But, you know, especially for those who kind of are veterans who've been around for a while, like, you know, they're not going to be afraid to say, like, it's, you know, unless you're having like a values problem here, unless we have like a misalignment of like core beliefs, like it's not about what you want, really.
No, yeah, and you know that makes 100%. And exactly what she said, I think it's perfect because I had done this, and I asked this one CEO, I was like, dude, what is up with your logo? I mean, here you are, you have this successful company, you know, you're worth millions of dollars, and your logo looks like, and I was like, the colors, you know, I was like, I don't mean to be mean. He's like, well, what about it? And he was kind of getting defensive, like right off the bat, and I'm like, why is he getting so defensive over a logo? You know, I mean, it's
did
just a
he
logo.
make it?
I mean, no, so when he first started the company, he asked his granddaughter that was little what color she loved the most, and then she brought the color crayons to him, and then drew this special. You know, not that she didn't draw the logo, but she drew this picture, and it had these colors, but the colors didn't really align. They weren't, you know, they were really off, and it almost looks like Wells Fargo colors or something like that orange and red. You know, it was like you know, like 80s orange and I mean it was just really
sounds attractive.
Yeah, it looked very 80s corporate, you know.
Yeah, you can't see me, but I'm cringing right now.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, and so you don't you know, a lot of times there's a hidden message.
Yes.
Underneath there, and I want business leaders to understand this. You're attaching emotion to something that is agnostic. There's no emotion to it. So what you're perceiving to be truthful may not be, because the data's turning around and saying that your logo is ugly. You know, and just because she brought you 2 color crayons, there's other ways to use that. But, you know, to be able to make sure that your message is clear, concise. And I want to ask you about this. How important is consistency? So we have a clear, we have a concise, and we have a brand voice. We have content creators. What does consistency look like when it comes to content?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It is important, undoubtedly. I may differ from other guests or even your opinion on this, but I find that being consistent is important, but don't create a schedule for yourself that you cannot fulfill. So, you know, if it feels like too much for your business to do whatever some blogger told you to do, like do this many blog posts a month and do this many social media posts a month and do this many, like if that is not doable for you, then do not do that. Do what is doable for you. Find your own consistent schedule and put it out there. And I think ultimately what's more important than, yes, consistent schedule is important. I think maybe equally important because, you know, if you're posting so sporadically that like the algorithms just like drop you like a hot potato, like it doesn't matter how great your content is. But, you know, assuming you're able to come up with some kind of consistency, the consistency of the message is key. And that's, I think, you know, where sometimes I think people fall down in both areas. Either they're like very clear on what they want to do, but they only kind of get around to it when they get around to it, or they're posting regularly and they're like, I need something to plug in on Wednesday. And so they just like, you know, it's like you shake a bag of Skittles and you're like, I guess a green one. Okay, let's do green. You know, like that's what popped out. And that's where you start to lose the strategy. It's like, what's the point of just sort of screaming into the wind?
Right. And there's lots of ways, to track all that so that you can see, you know, am I posting too much? Is my audience not clicking on these? You know, I mean, there's a lot of even free tools that have, you know, the capability. Bitly, I'm thinking of one where you can make links and you know, so there's lots of different ways to see your Google Analytics. You can attach that to, you know, your blog posts. So, you know, I think, you know, personally, people have always asked me that question, you know, like, should you I think SEO content writing, especially if you're a local company, or if you're, I know you have like clients that are coaches and stuff like that, that are very specific and niche to exactly what they are. Those seem to be it's funny. It's like here in Albuquerque, for instance, there's no blog post about pizza. I've looked it up, because occasionally I eat really good, but occasionally when I'm going to go over the deep end, I'm going to go, get a pizza.
Do it right. Yeah.
Yeah. You would think that there would be some pizza company with the hundreds of them that has had a writer write about, pizza or their pizza. And there's been no restaurant that wrote about the balloon fiesta. Like, why would you not, you're going to have a ton of people look up like best brewery in Albuquerque during the balloon fiesta.
Right.
Why would you not have articles that are written on that are SEO generated? So when you have the surge of people, and everybody has that, whether it's a state fair or whatever it may be, there's all these different ways. And I think a lot of people are spending so much, and I don't want to discount it, but social media, they're spending so much in social media and running these social media ads and getting zero results. When putting articles on your website, doing great blog posts, having a brand voice, these are things that have a long-term effect.
Yeah.
And a click, like instead of just this one linear hope for the, shoot for the win type of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm glad you said the long-term thing, because I do think, sure, the nice thing about an ad is like you could put it up today and it is totally possible that, you could put in $1, $2 come out of it and boom, instant ROI, like literally next day. That is totally possible. That is way less often the case with this sort of long-term organic content creation stuff. But at the end of the day, it can just be this like, you don't have to put in $1 for it. You've put in the effort for it. Right. And so it can continue working for you for years and years and years. Like, back when I was RVing, I ran a blog about, camping. And, yeah, I mean, we just put out quality content, like how to do stuff in the RV, or like, how to spend one day trip in, Death Valley National Park, or like whatever, and, just even slapping on like some Amazon affiliate links on there. I mean, it was like hundreds of dollars of affiliate money every month for me, just like writing about stuff I wanted to write about anyway, but it's because it was helpful content. And even now, 3 years later, I'm not active on that blog, and there is still revenue coming in every month from Amazon affiliates.
That's crazy. Well, and it's the same thing with SEO. People pay these SEO companies, thousands of dollars every month, and it's like, what are you paying them to do? One, and what are these reports that they're sending you? And I can say this, you don't have to say this, but number two, it's like, what are they adding to your website, and what type of value are they generating? It's like, I guarantee there's SEO companies that are out there that are working for these pizza companies in Albuquerque. And I'm just using this as an example. Are these breweries are they're real popular here in Albuquerque, but none of them have article on their website about why they're the best brewery, for the Balloon Festa, or what type of patios do they have, or we'd love to have your RV here. We have RV parking. I mean, there's like so much that can be done. That was something during COVID, was, why didn't anyone put pictures of their patios and how they're being safe? And, if you want to go out to eat, we've socially distanced the tables, and here's pictures of it, and here's what our wait staff is doing. There was no articles written about that. I think some of the bigger chains did that, but as far as like local companies, and then you're paying thousands of dollars to all these marketing companies, when if you're proactive and you have a writer, or you have a company like, NorthStar sitting there, they can guide you through these processes. And then the ROI long-term is, like you said, you have a blog post that happened years ago, and it's still returning.
Yeah, for sure. This is something that we started talking about last year when COVID came on the scene in a big way. It was like, compassionate content in a crisis. Cause I think a lot of times people are like, well, I don't want to like profit off of, people's misery. Right. And I saw so much in the online business owner, like service-based space.
Right.
All of a sudden people were like, oh, my course, which is usually $2,000, I'm offering it for free because of, I know people are going through hardship right now. And so it was just this like jump immediately to like freebies. And like nobody values that,
Right. 100%.
But instead, so it's like, well, how do I look at this in a more compassionate way? So like, for example, we have a client who's a dental specialist and she trains general dentists on her specialty because she's an endodontist, which means root canal specialist. So if only specialists did root canals, like the waiting list would be like years long because there just aren't enough specialists. So like general dentists need to know how to do this. And so she teaches them how to do it. And by the way, if there are any dentists listening to this, her name is Dr. Sonia Chopra. Check her out. She's awesome. But anyway, giving her a little plug.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, we changed her funnels, right? Because instead of it being like this big perk that it was like, you get to take this online course and you don't even have to shut down your practice. And now all of a sudden, like, well, they had to shut down their practice. That sounds really out of touch all of a sudden. And so it was just a matter of like taking a look at the content that even already exists, not even just new content, but like what's already in place and just making sure it like fits the moment, especially for something massive and long-term like COVID. It's just important. Like I even just saw today in one of our pieces of content, a word that we now no longer use because it is a problematic, insensitive word. And I'm like, whoa, okay, we need to update that. It happens to all of us because there's so much content out there. So like that stuff that you're like actively leveraging, like don't forget to look at that stuff.
Do you suggest that? I mean, or is there any, so let's take like, if you went back to Death Valley and you spent a day there and you updated that blog, and then, put the date that you updated or whatever, does that help the content? I know there's different theories on that, but is it actually worth to take the time? I mean, to make sure you're politically correct, I get all that, and go through, something that may be 5 years old.
Yeah.
But, to if you update content, does that help?
Yeah, if you do it in a way that doesn't disrupt whatever SEO mojo it already has going on, usually if you can kind of identify like what is it about this that's performing well, if it is already performing well, and then you just add and you don't actually disrupt what's there, then that can really help. If, however, you're like, this thing is working great, I'm getting 5,000 leads a month off this thing and blah, X percentage of them join my email list, like that's a great, awesome. Like don't change what you have, just add. If it's something that's like just not performing well though, maybe you just hadn't had a chance to do SEO research or you didn't just kind of stumble across a gold mine of, keywords, or a keyword phrase that was like doing well for you, then you can get a lot more creative and change a lot of things. That's my understanding. I would probably defer to an SEO expert. But that's, I would say just don't mess with success.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. I've seen people get a new marketing agency and then the marketing agency comes in there and changes everything.
Yeah.
And then they go to their analytics and they wonder, why
it's tanked
off 60%. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. So whenever, like with you guys, and NorthStar in particular, what type of clients do you guys look for? What do you, like if there's somebody out there and they're really intrigued about, brand voice, who do you guys love to work for? And cause I know you have that, you even have that on your bio, on your website, that we have all these clients that we love.
Yeah.
That we love and love to work for. So, I mean, are you guys looking for clients now? And if you are, what's the type?
Yeah. Well, I will say that we often have a wait list. So I would say number one is we love working with people who have a long-term vision and content will support that vision, but they're not the person who's like, and I need to launch this thing tomorrow. Because it's hard for us to accommodate that because we have ongoing retainer clients and we're happy to integrate new clients into that roster. But, it just means that we need to to make space so that we can give our clients, all of them, our love and attention, and not, make people feel tacked on, because we pride ourselves on, high quality. But I think, yeah, a really great fit for us would be somebody who, again, they're a successful business, and that like they have consistently, like, they're making 6 to 7 figures. There is a profit margin. Obviously there's successful businesses that are larger than that, but that tends to be who we work with. And they share values with us. And they recognize that they're the bottleneck for content creation. They're looking for some support in getting out of that. They probably have already worked with a writer and felt burned by them. And so they're like, I don't know, my friend told me that you could do this, and I'm skeptical. This is my last shot. They're walking into it, like, kind of giving us the stink eye. But it's pretty fun, because then we'll explain our process to them. They're like, oh, that's okay. That's like actually, a process. Great. It's not just like, oh, well, we do this because we're intuitive, like, no, like we ask very specific questions. We're looking for very specific information. And they tend to be service-based. And they tend to be agile enough that they could hire a writer and just have us train that writer, or they, they could decide based on what we uncover that, like, yeah, okay, maybe this launch plan that I do have, like, does work. And we're going to work together to figure out how the content can support that. And typically, they're willing to see a writer not as just a churner, but the person who comes in alongside them and can kind of be their chief of messaging, a partner who's able to come to the table as, like, a strategist who's got their back.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. So whenever I look at the brand voice part, and I know you have, a brand voice intensive and a brand voice VIP experience. If a company's interested in, establishing their brand voice?
Yeah.
Kind of that service, and how do you offer that, and what's the best way for them to get a hold of you in that?
Yeah. The easiest way is just to head to northstarmessaging.com/contact, or you can always email me, marie@northstarmessaging.com. But essentially that process, we have a pre-intensive questionnaire that they answer. It really only takes like 5 to 10 minutes. We try to keep it pretty painless. Kind of got these down to a science. I think I calculated we've done like 90 of these now. So we've kind of got it honed, and then we have a 90-minute intensive where we ask a lot of questions. That's on the lower priced one, which is, pretty much robust enough for most people. And we ask very specific questions. We turn around and then produce the guide for them. They get rounds of revisions on the guide, because every now and then somebody is going to be like, oh, that made me think of this, or, oh, I didn't actually mean that way. Let me rephrase or something. Yeah. And then from there, it's kind of up to them if they want our help with implementing it, or they just want us to train their team. But yeah, the bigger VIP one, that one is like, for instance, we're doing that right now for quite a massive nonprofit in the Pacific Northwest. And they have hundreds and hundreds of staff who run probably dozens of programs. And each of those programs has its own, marketing plan. And so they needed something more robust that could, like, really go very, very deep. Even things like, do we use the Oxford comma? How do we use em dashes? Like, stuff like that may not really be that important for, like, whatever, like Joe's nutritional coaching, right? Like, right. Because there's like so many people that we need to have a unified voice across dozens and dozens of like marketing people. So that's
on the audience. That's all based on that. So
right.
If that not-for-profit audience is, concerned about a comma, then that's what if they're a philanthropist and they go to this, the Northwest Symphony, Seattle Symphony, something like that, and they all have, PhDs, then that's extremely important.
Yeah, they're like, I'm withdrawing my support because of but
Right, exactly.
I mean, and it's also like you have to get into like, yeah, they do have donors, but they also have like public partners that they work with. There are also other nonprofits that they partner with. There's also the general public that they serve, right? And so like there's different audiences, and the nuance will be a little different depending on who's supposed to see it. Is this a grant application? Is this a social media post? Is this a newsletter to their collaborative partners? Like, so, you know, we have to kind of dig into the deep stuff. So that's why we created the larger version of it for organizations that just have like a lot more moving parts.
Yeah, and it's pretty extensive. I mean, you can go to the NorthStarMessaging.com. I think it's brand voice intensive or something, but I saw it under the work with us and then the brand voice, and it had it on there close to the bottom of the page for the organization. Well, we've talked for over an hour. We did this last time.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I really appreciate it, Marie. And if once again, what is your guys' website?
Yeah. So here, I'm going to actually spell this out because I don't know that I trust my ability to have my Southern accent translate appropriately in a podcast. So it's NorthStarMessaging.com. That's NorthStarMessaging. Or you can follow us on Instagram at the exact same thing, NorthStar Messaging.
That's perfect. Well, thank you for once again created a ton of value. And I know this is going to be super exciting for CEOs and those that are listening to this that are looking at brand voice. And this is something that is hugely important. And, you know, my opinion on this, and maybe you could close on this, but my opinion on this is you're kind of behind the times if you don't have, if your voice isn't clear. You know, it's you're just relying on old school marketing and techniques that are it's costing you more money than you think. You know, if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and you don't have a clear ROI or have any type of data to show for that, this is something that you can get alignment through your organization. And then in turn, you know, like you said, you can give it to your writers, you can give it to your marketing team, you can give it to, you know, and the list goes on and on with everyone that, I mean, you can have cultural classes and make YouTube videos on it, you know, I mean, and add it to your workflow for people that need to do classes when they, you know, with human resources. I mean, the list goes on and on with this. It could be super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, we're constantly consuming, right? All of us are constantly consuming, and there was somebody behind everything we're consuming. And so, you know, I think the sort of challenge in this, but also I think the exciting part of this is the work is never quite done. Even when we create a brand voice guide for a client, we encourage them like, hey, put this on your calendar every 6 to 12 months, take a look at it, because your business will evolve and change over time. And your voice needs to reflect that. You know, you're going to create new offers. You may shift your audience a little bit. You may, like I said, you know, you may discover there's a word that was part of your sort of brand vocabulary that now you want to remove and replace with something else. These things happen all the time. And if we don't have a time to check in with ourselves, then yeah, we are going to kind of end up behind the time. But at least in this way, you have a framework to go from there, and you can continue to create messaging that's going to not only be aligned for your business and your brand, but ultimately give you that ROI that you're looking for.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, Marie. I appreciate you being on the ABQ Business Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for letting me reprise my time here, Jason. It's been great to catch up.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.